So I'm here with chapter 20. It's a pretty long chapter. I'm just waiting for simulcast to come up. Here it comes. Just making sure it's loaded correctly, because if it doesn't, it's not good. I'm live streaming with YouTube and Facebook, something called Twitch, and then I let people know about it on Twitter and LinkedIn. So, chapter 20 is kind of long. I don't know if I'm going to... Well, we'll see. I think it's 12 pages. It's a good chapter. I mean, the book is very, very readable. And it's 22 pages. We'll see. So anyway, chapter 20. So, where we left them last, they are with Attila. And Attila's never easy to be with. Under a sky tinted red by the setting sun, Attila's servants rushed to load a horse-drawn cart with spoils of the campaign. Scowling, the Hun watched as the wagon lumbered toward the ceremony grounds. As Lena and Valamir mounted, the red-haired Gaul was nowhere to be seen. She wondered at his absence, but soon forgot with the effort to remain astride. Attila set the pace at a hard gallop, shouting with excitement. With ease, Valamir's roan followed the Huns' deft maneuvering through the multitude of tents. At the edge of camp, they entered the ceremony grounds. Their horses stretched out in a pounding run. The sea of horses and men made way for them, opening, then closing behind. A deafening roar beat Helena's ears. The men chanted, "Attila! Attila!" It was as if they worshipped him. Attila guided them to the same spot as the previous night. He dismounted with a flourish and flung his reins to an attendant. His solitary chair waited for him, surrounded by a variety of pillaged goods. In the distance, Helena noticed the cart with her father's possessions making steady progress as the driver skirted the crowd. Several horse lengths behind Attila's chair, animals, including a few oxen, were tethered. Near the animals, Rhys was manacled with chains on his wrists and ankles. Despite the ignominy of being grouped with animals as chattel, he held his head high. She honored his pride. With a chill, she understood that if not for Valamir, her circumstances would have been little different. As Valamir lifted her from Hassan, her eyes remained on Rhys. Following her gaze, the Goth gently touched her chin, turning her face towards him. His expression was intense and his mouth compressed. "Say nothing to Attila in front of the men. Nothing. Do you understand?" "I won't," she said. "Good," Valamir replied. He gave Hassan's neck a brief pat and relinquished the reins to his servant. Holding her hand, he took his position at Attila's right. The Hun stood, his hands at his waist, surveying the gathering. He waited, glaring, until the large crowd's drone abated. He strode forward and addressed them in Hunnic. Cheers greeted his rousing words, measured in succinct phrases. The men did not quiet until he raised his arms with head bowed for silence. In crisp Gothic, he commanded the other war leaders to join him. Not for the first time, Helena was struck by the regular intermixture of the two languages, sometimes in the same sentence, evidence of the growing symbiosis of the nations. With the exception of Thudamir, last night's select group gathered around Attila. For Helena, his absence only underscored his complicity in the plot against Valamir. Not a commander, he had no right to take a seat within the inner circle. Yesterday, Attila had allowed him that privilege. "Valamir's band has brought me wealth," Attila said, pointing to the wagon behind him. "Behold the gold and gems. He's asked for little, giving up his share, but he must have his reward." The men roared their approval. Valamir stood reluctantly. Attila paused, again demanding silence. When he spoke, his voice was low and rich with drama. Valamir, before this day, my 4 commanders have been equals. From now on, you are my second in command. I honor your cunning, your patience and strategy. These are virtues worthy of a Hun. Cheers erupted from the men, not just for Valamir. More than anything, they celebrated their nature. They were Huns. Not wanting to consider the consequences of Valamir's promotion, Helena retreated to cynicism, wondering if the men's reaction would be the same mindless outburst whenever the words Attila or Hun were mentioned. Attila snapped his fingers and pointed to Valamir. With alacrity, attendants presented the Goth with the sword and the rug. A soldier dragging Rhys hit the back of his head, forcing him to grovel at Valamir's feet. He flashed his sword, pointing the tip to the soldier's neck. Be careful of my property. The Hun's foot was raised for another blow, but he dropped it to the ground, almost losing his balance as he obeyed. When Helena heard Pasiel's whinny, her heart leapt. From horseback, another Hun led both the stallion and the mare. She hated that they had been brought here, but time began to hurry, moving too quickly for thought. Attila reached for her hand, holding her up. As he looked at her, his eyes were smoldering. Her lungs felt on fire, parched with fear. This woman is Valamir's, he said, joining her hand with the Goth's. The shaman has bound them. Again he paused, waiting for the clamor to cease. I bestow upon him 1 gem, a ring, and many gold coins. With the exception of the ring, already strung on a necklace around Helena's neck, Attila held up the diamond and each gold coin before placing them one by one in Valamir's hands. Then his voice was low, the communication private. Enjoy the fruits of your labors, Valamir. Finished, Attila raised his arms, palms upward. As the men clapped rhythmically, their approval edged towards pandemonium. Leaving Helena and Valamir behind, he stepped closely to the crowd, his hands at his waist, and spoke again in Hunnic. Her hands in his, Valamir guided Helena to a rug on the ground. As evening ebbed into night, torches were lit. For Helena, the ceremony was endless. She watched as each man came forward, eager for his prize, till her eyes glazed with fatigue. She wondered how Attila kept from being hoarse. Behind her, Pasiel nickered, restless to be away from this noisy place. Worried that he was being mishandled, she turned to him, but the Hun was gone, leaving his charges to their own devices, though safely hobbled. Then her eyes found Rhys's. He was still on his knees, but he had raised his head. His red beard did nothing to hide the fatigue in his face. As his eyes flashed with hostility, she understood him. Hate sustained him, delivering him from shame. She hoped that Valamir had not made a deadly error in judgment, that the Gaul would not murder them one night when they slept. With bitter irony, Helena understood that in Attila's mind, her difference from Rhys was only a matter of degree. Both of them had been labeled and designated as property. Helena wanted to tell Rhys that no one could subdue his spirit. No one could truly own him. Yet, she had no words to express what was etched in her heart. Eyes fixed on the ground, he retreated once more into himself. She hoped that he already knew. Time passed. Helena did not pay much attention to the distribution of spoils, the most valuable portion being her grandfather's possessions. Cansford had paid off the guards with a part of it, then called the rest her dowry before forcing her into marriage with him. Many Huns received a gold or silver coin, some an inferior jewel. The back of her neck prickled, and she looked up to see Grulia. He stood before Attila, staring at her. By his side, Maga was bound at the wrist with a heavy cord, the end held loosely in his large hands. Lena's blood rushed to her legs, urging flight. To avoid seeing him, she dropped her eyes and noticed her grandfather's prayer rug, partly open. The torchlight glistened on the silken pattern, highlighting the blood room, hidden in plain view by being intermixed with another pattern. Without realizing it, she reached for her knife, snared by an acute craving to seal the curse against Greeley with blood. A hand closed over hers. With desperate rage, she turned to see Valamir's implacable eyes staring at her, seeing the darkness that had become her soul. She shrank from his judgment. As if it were hot, she released her knife. Valimir kept hold of her hand, putting it safely in his lap. Greeley bowed to Attila. "Cousin, tell me how I have shamed you. Tell me of my dishonor." He pointed to Valimir. "Else why would you put this Goth above your own clan?" Attila's gaze swept him mercilessly. In his hard eyes, Attila could see Greelia's death. The crowd was hushed, expectant. Incapable of a modicum of self-control, Greelia stepped closer to Valimir, but well beyond a sword's length. "He cheated me! He stole from me!" The crowd remained silent, waiting for Attila's lead. Into the void, Attila spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, but projected so that all could hear. "Who saw the woman first?" Greelia hesitated. "Valimir, but I found her after she ran." Attila turned to those who had followed Valimir and were grouped together for the ceremony. "Men, my cousin gnaws at my patience. Give me counsel. Was Valamir's claim on this woman clear?" Speaking for the band, Ishiite stood. Only a blind man or someone truly stupid would not have known. The men laughed, not caring if Attila saw their antipathy. Greelia's persistent complaints and grievances had not made him popular. They tolerated and suffered him for Attila's sake. "Why do you trouble me with this nonsense?" Attila said, his voice moderate, escalating with each word like a martial song, drawing to a finale. "Have you lost all respect for our traditions, for our laws, and most of all for me, that you come before the tribe, whining like a spoiled child? Weren't you once my cousin?" "I do not know you. You are a stranger, though still of my tribe. Perhaps a day will come when you deserve the honor belonging to my family, but that remains to be seen." Greelia threw himself on the ground, groveling at Attila's feet. "Forgive me, Lord Attila. My selfishness blinded me. But see, I brought you my woman. I give her to you, as is your right, unlike Valimir, who denies you." Attila ran his appraising eye over Magga, who had been made more presentable. She wore a different dress, though not new. It was in one piece, not ripped into shreds. Her face, still bruised, was less swollen and clean. Even her hair had been combed. But her beauty was a shadow of its former glory. Attila's nose twitched, almost disdainfully, but then he looked at her again. "You insult Valimir. His wife is not a whore to be passed from man to man. Perhaps you cannot understand that. Most would, but I'll accept this woman for one night. Then we'll see if I know you again." Greelia, his forehead on the ground, reached for Attila's felt boots. "You honor me." Stepping back a pace, Attila avoided his touch, unsheathing his sword. "Rise and accept my gift to you." Greelia sat back on his heels, immobile as the point of the sword hovered in front of his right eye. "Ishiite told us that even a blind man could have seen Valamir's claim to the woman," Attila said. "Perhaps you'll see better without one of your eyes." Not blinking, Greelia became a statue, betraying no weakness and no fear. Attila grunted with approval. "At least your courage is worthy of a Hun. In this you are one with the tribe. But you've offended my honor. Only a gift of your blood will appease it." His eyes narrowed and his voice became flat, without inflection. "Will you make me an offering?" Greelia nodded once. The sword remained poised before his eye, then floated downward to his cheek, piercing flesh until it met bone. Attila's smile glittered. No sound issued from Greelia's throat. Even his cousin, his leader, wrenched the sword away in a downward thrust, ripping open his cheek. Blood flowed from the wound, wetting Greelia's tunic. Helena stared, forgetting everything but the blood, running in thin rivulets down his cheek. Even Attila was lost to the shadows. and the darkness that was in her mind. A voice hummed in her head, whispering like the wind on a starless night, "Do it! Do it now!" As if it had its own will, her hand withdrew from Volomir's loosened grasp and quickly inscribed in the air her grandfather's rune, summoning the ancient force. Closing her eyes, she surrendered to the ecstasy, not caring that it was pernicious and deadly to her soul. It filled her, lending her strength, yet part of her, crushed into silence, was crying. Her voice was dry, like dry leaves, swept across stone by the wind. Her words were archaic Persian. Grilia, may the earth drink your blood. May she eat your bones, quenching her appetite on your bloated carcass. May your death be slow, lingering. I'll rejoice in the day that your shadow no longer walks beside you. Because then all women, all mothers, will have reason to smile. I give you to the darkness to do with what it pleases. To do with as it pleases. Once more she resonated with power, as if her body had grown in stature, able to dominate. But the exhilaration soon faded into exhaustion, leaving her cold and shaken. Still the dark presence persisted. Though outside of her body, she remembered that she should be afraid of it, that it was profane. But she ignored the danger. She had the right to a just revenge. An inner voice, coming from her heart, thrust through her rationalizations as a clear tone tolling. This is evil, an abomination, forcing nature, binding her to its malevolent will. The words seared her conscience, scorching her belief that she was a decent, good person. Not for the first time she wondered at these voices, afraid that she had taken the first steps down the path to the wizened, crazy crone, to that horrible vision of what could be. She pictured the rune that Karachapan had shown her, understanding that she should use it. He had worried that it lacked strength to negate the darkness. Grandfather had taught it to her as a child, describing it as potent through its simplicity. Oddly reluctant, she focused on her heart, feeling it expand with light. Slowly she put her finger to the earth and forced it to inscribe the countersign. Instantly, the malevolence was gone. She shook her head, denying the temptation to lie on the ground and sleep. Not trusting her self-control, she turned to Volomir to keep her eyes from Giulia. The man who had become her husband watched her, his expression apprehensive, as if he held his breath and waited. Trying to smile reassuringly, Helena almost began to cry. His methods of retribution were honorable, but he had the luxury of being a man, a soldier who could kill. She averted her face, only to be ensnared by Attila's compelling stare. He had seen everything. His interest was avid and voracious. His probing eyes were spellbinding, and Helena shuddered, reminded of the presence that followed her inscription of the dark room. His thirst for knowledge was palpable and devouring. She could not move or even blink. Panicking, Helena thought of her grandfather's rune, knowing it would help. But she felt a shift within her heart. Suddenly she smiled and called on the wise lord to help her, his misguided servant, and knew that she would not have to pay with her soul. Suddenly, Attila's eyes became as any other man's. Her smile broadened at his look of consternation. She felt proud, even vindicated by her trust in God's light. Attila raised an eyebrow and nodded his head once, as if to acknowledge her brief victory. Giulia lingered, still at Attila's feet, the blood flowing more slowly down his cheek. Standing at the side, Maga kept desperate eyes fixed on Attila, as if he were her only hope. Despite herself, Helena began to worry. What if Maga wormed her way into his confidence? The whispered words about poison floated through her mind, but she tried to put them aside, telling herself that the wives had been unable to prove Maga's guilt. She thought of Ilias, Kanzbar's last wife, writhing on the ground, clutching her stomach, her pale eyes fixed on Maga. Helena knew what she had to do. Yet she resisted. She had no allegiance to Attila. He was not her friend, but the enemy of the civilized world. She owed him nothing. Magga would have no need to poison him. She would covet his power, wanting to feed on it. But deep within, Helena understands that Magga's arrogance was perverse and twisted, allowing her to justify her actions even if ruin followed in its wake. She remembered Ivan and Magga whispering on the ground, Ludmilla shaking her head in emphatic disagreement, and the knife in Ivan's hand. Magga would do anything to survive, even betraying those who loved her without thinking twice. In the end, she had cast her lot with Julia, forsaking both Ivan and Kanspar. Helena felt prompted to tell Attila about the rumors. A death by Magga's hand would be ignominious. Still, she hesitated, trying to believe that it was for Valamir's sake. After all, if Attila died, Julia would contest the band's leadership through his kinship with their king. The taste in her mouth became bitter as she admitted her worry had little to do with Valamir. It was personal. Attila was dangerous and ruthless, but vibrant and so alive. His intellect, a constant challenge to her will, was a force almost to itself. If he died, she would miss it. As Attila pointed to Julia, his stance was regal. Has this stranger satisfied my honor? His voice rang out to the tribe of more than 2,000 men. Or does he owe me more? The crowd's answer was mixed. Though they shouted in Hunnic, the language was no barrier to Helena's understanding. Some touched their knives to their throats, graphically delineating their opinion. Others turned their thumbs up, imitating the Romans. Magga edged closer to Attila, distancing herself from Julia. Her head was bowed, but her cheeks were flushed with excitement. Her tongue flicked across her lips, as if tasting Julia's blood. Valamir, Helena whispered. Later, Helena, he whispered back, keeping his eyes on Attila. I have something important to tell Attila. Can it wait until after the ceremony? His concern for his leader superseded protocol. Yes, but you must know before tonight. Valamir nodded. I'll see to it. He wrapped his arm around her, providing shelter from exhaustion. With a contemptuous wave of his hand, Attila dismissed Julia and signaled for Magga to be taken away. The proceedings wore on, and his eyes grew heavy as she fell into darkness, not waking till the ceremony drew to its end. Valamir nudged her. It's over. She opened her eyes confused and did not immediately recognize her whereabouts. Memory returned with torment. Torn by indecision, Helena grappled with her quandary. If Magga pleased Attila, why should she resort to poison? After all, had not all of the wives heard her weave her magic with Kanspar night after night? Helena deliberated and wondered if her motives arose from dislike of Magga rather than from sincere concern for Attila's well-being. As Kanspar's favorite, she had harassed the other women and taunted them with her elevated position. Forcing herself to be honest, Helena acknowledged that the sight of Magga, humbled and helpless, had its appeal. Attila spoke his closing words. The answering roar was deafening. Helena clenched her teeth and endured the sound. She forced her hands to stay at her sides, not allowing them to shield her ears. The crowd started to disperse. Easily half the spoils remained with Attila. Magga was already gone. Detached, Helena watched as his attendants carefully placed them in the waiting wagon. A slave brought Attila's black stallion. Another led us on. Attila motioned for Valamir and Helena to approach. The men were pleased. He seemed restless and ready to go. Until tomorrow morning. Attila, Valamir said, Helena wishes to tell you something. The Hun turned to her. Can it wait? She shook her head, uncertain of what to do. She tried to hear her inner voice, but it was silent. Helena, talk to me. Attila's voice was brusque, but not unkind. In it she heard affection. Her heart beating fast, she met his eyes. It's for Valamir and you alone. Attila shouted to the accumulation of soldiers and servants who surrounded them. Be gone! Obedience was instant. At a discreet distance, all waited to finish the task left undone. Now, Helena, step closer and tell me in Greek, but softly. Keeping her hand in Valamir's, she approached the Hun. Attila looked pointedly at them, their intertwined fingers, and smiled, shaking his head. Always thinking, aren't you? Keeps me alive, she said. He laughed. First, I must know something. Is this to do with Grelia? No. Tell me what you said to him tonight. The language was strange, but it reminded me of Persian. What did you say? You drew a symbol with your hand. Explain it, Attila said. I can't, not now, she said, feeling ashamed and not wanting to expose her darkness. He narrowed his eyes. You will tell me, but I'll wait until tomorrow. Now give me the information you wish to share. Her doubts set aside, she faced him. It's about the woman Maga. Grelia's new whore? Attila laughed incredulously. What can she matter? Concisely, Helena describes Maga's position in the village, the mystery of her background, and her character. Attila nodded impatiently, but not impressed. Helena paused, gathering the will to continue. Feeling guilty, she believed that her next words would destroy Maga's chance with him. She hated to leave any woman, even Maga, at Grelia's mercy. Valamir interrupted. The bitch betrayed the old chief with his own men. Their relationship was old and ripe with contempt for many months. She even tried to attach herself to me. When all else failed, she flung herself at Grelia. She's not to be trusted. Attila shrugged. Is this all? No, Helena said. There's something else. All the women suspected that Maga had knowledge of poisons. We watched her rival die painfully, her stomach cramped, but none of us dared speak against her. I've no proof, but you should know that I never let her near my son's food or mine. Why warn me, Helena? You could have let me take my chances, Attila asked. Helena felt miserable. I don't know. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe Elias just died of natural causes. Did anyone else fall sick that night? No. His eyes were magnetic, his face close to hers. You didn't want to denounce Grelia's woman. That much I could tell. Why did you speak? She looked away, trying to escape and wanting to hide the tears wetting her lashes. I don't want you to die, she whispered. But you don't approve of my ambitions. Valamir needs you. Attila chuckled, but shook his head. You've another reason. Don't the Christians believe that truth is good for the soul? Tell me. She faced him, her eyes dark with anger. Maybe I'd miss arguing with you. He grinned. You undervalue yourself. You are loyal, Helena, a true friend, and I thank you. We never proved Maga's guilt, she said, still feeling troubled and wanting to be fair. Don't worry. I won't harm her, at least not tonight. But I'll enlighten her about what we do to poisoners. Then she'll teach me her secrets. You'd work with poison? His eyes were blank. His face was a mask. No, it's a woman's weapon. As he turned away from them, she sensed his lie. With troubled eyes, she watched him mount and ride off. Despite his words of friendship, she violently vowed to keep Valamir's food safe from his hands. Worried, she touched Valamir's arm. Did I do right? I wanted her to kill Grelia, but now Attila will warn him. I'm proud of you. You protected a friend. Attila is connected to me. Our destinies are intertwined. If he died, it would be my loss. Her stomach turned. In choosing Attila's well-being over Maga's, she had become an ally of the heir apparent to the most hated barbarians in the Empire. What's wrong, Valamir? Asked. Are you sick? She shook her head. I care for you, but you ride with Huns. I am who I am, Helena. But you have my heart. She was silent. I've never known anyone like you. You came into my life, changing everything, and I'm afraid. Yet when I'm with you, I feel alive. They were not alone. Attila's attendants finished packing his share of the plunder in the waiting cart. Others cleared the debris from the ceremony. Valamir's breath caressed her ear, arousing her body with unexpected sensations. Someday, with your consent, I will marry you with my body, and not just my heart. He cupped her face in his strong hands, his eyes passionate, and she blushed. He smiled, amused by her reaction. I treasure that you're shy, at least about this. He released her, but his hand retained a light pressure on her back. Then he noticed Reese still in chains, waiting next to the rug, the sword, and the 2 horses. Valdemar frowned and tightened his hold on Alina, as if to protect her. Reese ignored her, locking eyes with Valdemar as if daring him. Attila has warned me against you, Reese, Valdemar said, speaking in Gothic. He tells me that you're trouble, that you'd be better off dead. But his needs are different than mine. He requires the souls of his slaves and unquestioning obedience. I need someone to help me with my horses. Are you interested? Reese's face was shuttered, his nod grudging. How well do you speak our language? Enough to be useful, Reese said, his accent inflecting his words up and then down, as in a musical phrase. Good. As one of Attila's house servants passed, Valdemar grabbed him by the shoulders. I need a smith. Now. Bring me one with tools to remove my slave's chains. The man bowed. Prince Valdemar, that one's a runner, even with a cut tendon. You might reconsider unchaining him. He understands the whip. Then he's obedient, at least for a while. Valdemar's expression was terrible. His voice was a roar. Are you deaf? I asked for a smith, not your opinion. Go! Without argument, the servant ran. Scowling, Valdemar pointed to the Hun who had brought Pastiel and Serio. You, take those horses back to where you found them. The man followed orders without a word. Valdemar grunted with approval. He's a soldier knows when enough to obey, unlike certain servants who think that they know what's best for everyone. Why are you so angry at Attila's man? Helena asked. He dares to disagree with me. But Karajapan does all the time. He has wisdom. That one, he said, inclining his head toward the servant running toward the interior of the camp. He's no more than a petty fool, always complaining. Reese snorted with laughter, but immediately suppressed it. Helena and Valdemar quickly turned to look, but the man's face had become as blank as stone. Valdemar pursed his eyes and studied the Gaul. Reese, would you like to be your own man? Keeping his features rigid, Reese tried not to betray his interest, but his eyes blazed. Well, Valdemar asked, not continuing without an answer. May I speak the truth? I wait for it, Valdemar said. The gods willing, I would be my own master once again. Then listen. I don't keep slaves. They are a nuisance. But a good servant, that's another matter. Do well by my horses, make yourself useful to Karajapan, guard my wife on the journey home, and I'll set you free. I'll have a scribe give you papers and money for your trip to Gaul as your wages. Lena's throat felt tight, her eyes hot with emotion at Valdemar's generosity. When she was 6, her grandfather had given Miriam, the nursemaid, her freedom. The woman's middle-aged face, usually pinched with worry, had been transformed with joy, obliterating years. Reese bowed from the waist to Valdemar. You'll never find a better servant. When I heard that you had asked for me, my heart was glad. All the slaves know that you are just. But I've no one left in Gaul. My village is dust raised by the Romans. Lena's heart constricted. Once we've crossed the Danube and reached home, you can decide, Valdemar said. Stay with me if you like. I'll pay you for your time. Reese radiated happiness. His posture became erect and proud without defiance. You are truly noble. I thank you. Valdemar nodded almost curtly. They may understand each other. Yes. Grilla will never come near your wife as long as I have breath in my body. What do you know of this? Valdemar asked, his voice instantly vehement and suspicious. Only what my eyes and ears tell me. Then you have done well. Look, he said, pointing to the smith hurrying towards them with 2 horses, one for himself, the other for his equipment. We'll get this iron off you. You've worked for me, Prince Valdemar? The Hun asked, bringing his horses to an abrupt halt. Yes, Valdemar said, pulling out a silver coin and holding it before the smith's eyes. Do you see this? He nodded, his face alight. It's yours if you take off these manacles without causing my slave pain. Hurt him and get nothing. Do you agree? The smith did not hesitate. I can do it. He turned to his job. First, he carefully wrapped cloths between Reese's skin and the metal bands. As the smith worked, Valdemar watched intently. and the last manacle dropped to the ground with a thud. The Hun's face was wet with perspiration. You did well, Smith, Valimir said. As a reward, you'll have not one but two of these coins. The Hun examined the money in his hand and looked at Valimir with childlike delight. I'm your servant, Prince Valimir. Prince, ask for me again, and I'll come like the wind. Valimir, laughing, waved him away. He turned to Rhys. You'll have to walk. With deft movements, Valimir strapped the Persian sword to his side and placed the prayer rug in Rhys's arms. As they returned to the tents, Valimir kept Hassan's pace slow, much to the animal's chagrin. And that's chapter 20. I read the whole thing. It was long. So, we forget that there was horrible slavery, slavery, they would conquer and they would make people slaves. So, to Valimir, that didn't want that. So, chapter 21, and then we'll see. At some point, we will, I'm not sure how far I'm going to go. I went pretty far, look, that's really far. That's left. Not so much left.